A good afternoon and welcome from the Billroth House in Vienna to talk about No Time to Think of What You Don't Have, Digitalization and AI in Europe. This is the launch event of a recent publication that we as NEOS Lab collaborated on with the European Liberal Forum, and I very warmly welcome a couple of speakers and a welcoming guest from different countries in Europe and even from the US. Julia Puertonda joins us from Florida. We have Charles from the Netherlands today in our call, and Erich Brehm from the city of Graz. Digitalization and AI and its impact on society have been peripheral topics over some part of the last couple of months. There was a lot of focus on COVID-19, but at the same time we have seen that digitalization, digital tools have been important to make societies, economies, and even politics more resilient in times of crisis. And so we used our project together with the European Liberal Forum to grasp where we have still weaknesses and hurdles to overcome and to overcome those hurdles and provide more of a positive attitude towards digitalization and artificial intelligence. Europe might lack some of the digital infrastructure in rural areas and even some of the funding. We just had the very unfortunate BREXIT, the exit of Great Britain from the European Union, and together with that, 55% loss of private equity funds within the European AI sector. But nevertheless, the EU is a great place to innovate and has some strengths that we might also look at in today's talk. The project that we did together with ELF asked how the EU and its member states can encourage investment in the AI sector and foster substantial European digital infrastructure improvement. And we'll talk about which steps might really foster this development together with our authors today and our experts. But first of all, I would like to hand over to one of the cities that we have partners today in our call, and that would be Brussels. Lauren Mason from the European Liberal Forum might ask you to give us some words on our project, No Time to Think of What You Don't Have, Digitalization and AI in Europe, from the Brussels perspective.
Thank you very much, Lucas, and good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome also from Brussels. My name is Lauren Mason. I'm the project coordinator at the European Liberal Forum. And for those of you who might not know ELF yet, we're the political foundation and the think tank of the European Liberal family. So that means that we work very closely with the ALDE party and with the Renew Europe group in the European Parliament, but also with our member organisations. We have 48 member organisations who are based all around Europe, and one of those, of course, is the NEOS Lab in Austria. And we're very happy indeed that NEOS Lab came to us with the idea of this project, looking precisely at the questions of how the EU and its member states can encourage innovation in the AI sector. Now, Lucas mentioned that COVID-19 was obviously a big impetus in this sense, but indeed, as Liberals, we're very much in favour of forward-looking policies, looking at how we can develop Europe's digital competencies and be a bit more at ease with AI, because it can be a topic that sounds a bit scary. There are lots of kind of perhaps challenges that need to be addressed, but it's definitely something where Europe can be a leader. And that's one of the angles that the project has looked at in this sense. Well, I don't want to go too much into the topics now, because we've got three excellent expert speakers with us who will be able to give a few more details, but we're very happy to have you joining us. Of course, if you want to share any of your thoughts on social media, you're more than invited to do so. You can always use the hashtag ELF event and we'll pick those up. It's always great for us as well to have these events taking place sort of outside of Brussels, bringing in perspectives from outside of the bubble, and to hear a bit about the ideas all across Europe, so that we're also better informed and can help our Liberal colleagues here in Brussels. But I think I will stop there and hand the floor back over to Lucas, who I think is going to guide us through the discussion today.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you for the warm words. as NEOS Lab, we are the think tank and academy of the Liberal Party in Austria of NEOS, as you pointed out correctly. And as its director, I've been very much focusing on also kind of strengthening our publication output over the last couple of months. And even though COVID-19, of course, is always an impetus and always a topic, but we try to raise topics that are that might be of importance going further down the road, and not only maybe looking at what is going on right now, because if that would be the case, we might have to talk about COVID-19 again in Austria, given the recent spike and the skyrocketing of cases. But I want to briefly introduce our paper that we look at today. A Creative European Approach to Digital Intelligence is its title, and I might be able to give you a very broad overview about the paper in lots of details, also about the policy brief that we did in this project. But actually, there might be a much better way to give you an impression of what we did in this project, and that might be through a brief introductory video. And I may ask the Regie to just show us briefly what we did and what the project was all about.
Digitalization and AI in Europe? Yes, artificial intelligence, AI, is one of the most discussed and expandable technologies today. AI plays a major role in Europe's healthcare sector, education, culture, engineering and economy, and industry in our daily life. But Europe seems to see AI and its role in black and white. Although AI has fascinating and powerful capabilities, the system is often limited by relatively small functions. Europe has to see itself more positively, but not to ignore the facts. A massive amount of data, a general regulation of the collection and usage, and improvement of education, digitalization of public administration, and green companies. This also leads to a discussion about data ethics and privacy principles and the weakness of the European digital infrastructure. A complex set of regulations often stops a project before it even starts in Europe, while global players make use of all kinds of open sources, open data to shape technologies for the future. What we want and expect from the future from AI? We propose a more creative, positive approach to AI and digital technologies. Europe has to focus on its national and international strengths, such as embedded AI, and motivate, educate, and train people to become more interested, skilled, and active in digitalization. The European Member States and Commission also have to consider carefully the costs of regulation and cooperation between traditional programs, agencies, and departments of government services. While developers should target a young, broad audience to experiment with AI, AI-based innovation and digitalization may flourish best where traditional boundaries of engineering disciplines, humanities, and arts overcome.
So thank you for this brief and very nicely animated introduction. Unfortunately, we don't have the happy music for our debate now, but I am much more interested in your insights and views from Graz, the Netherlands, and Florida right now. I might briefly introduce you to the speakers that we have today on our panel, even though it's digitally, and want to raise your attendance first to Erich Brehm. He's the author of the paper we talk about today. He's the managing director of Oitema Technology and RTD Strategy Consultancy. His educational background spans computer sciences, philosophy, general management, and Erich Brehm was a visiting scholar at the MIT's Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. He's also a trainer and a university lecturer in AI, innovation, and philosophy, including the aspects of digital humanism. And as a consultant, he works in strategic research and innovation management, and also works as an evaluator for RTD projects such as Horizon 2020 by the European Commission. Erich, thanks a lot for your time and for your inputs and for your attendance today.
Pleasure. Hello.
Then I want to cross the pond in a way and welcome you all to Julia Puertonda. She is a behavioral economist with doctorates in social and economic sciences and natural sciences. She's currently, as she told us before, teaching in New York, but joining us today from Florida. She has written a couple of papers on behavioral science, behavioral finance, and recently in 2019 she did collaborate with us, the NEOS Lab and ELF, on a study on big data, artificial intelligence and healthcare, developing a legal policy and ethical framework for using AI, big data, robotics and algorithms in healthcare, and which could be more timely than this topic looking past in the last couple of years. Julia, thanks again for your time and being here with us today.
Thank you.
And finally, at least on my screen, he's the one in the middle. Charles is joining us from the Netherlands, he told me before. He's written a policy brief for NEOS Lab and the recent project we did on the state of affairs of digitalization in Europe. He's a researcher in the field of economics, specializing on the topic of digitalization at the University Libre de Bruxelles, so the Free University of Brussels. He is currently involved in projects concerning the adoption of digital technologies in the European Union and how to measure actually where we are when it comes to our digitalization approach. Charles, also to you, thanks again for your time and for discussing the topic with us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody.
So maybe if we raise the topic of digitalization and artificial intelligence in Europe, I would like to start with kind of the status quo, the state of digitalization in Europe, and then go to the policies and the actions that might amount to overcome hurdles that we might identify on the way forward, and that were also already raised very briefly, of course, in the video that we just saw. Regarding the state of digitalization, Europe is sometimes viewed as a laggard, lagging behind the development that we see in the US, for instance, or in China. And I would like to first start with how you would describe from your background of expertise the current European state of the digital infrastructure, the digital economy also, and digital policies that might be in place right now. And I would like to start with Erich Brehm, the author of our study today. How would you describe the current state of the European digital infrastructure?
Thank you. Well, this is a very difficult question to summarize in one sentence and to give a short answer, but I'll try. In summary, I have to admit that as a computer scientist, I was positively surprised by how resilient Europe has proven in times of the pandemic, and how much information systems and digital systems in general have helped us overcome certain, all the difficulties of the pandemic. However, having said that, it is true that there is great variation throughout Europe as to how easy it was for people to switch to a digital mode, and for example, how easy it was for students to switch to an online mode based on A, the infrastructure, which varies greatly throughout Europe, and B, also their, let's say, educational equipment, both in hardware and in software and in their competencies. So it's a mixed picture. On the one hand, surprisingly resilient. I think we have proven to exhibit a great utilization of digital technologies. In many cases, there was an enormous jump ahead, which people would not have believed beforehand. On the other hand, obviously, a range of shortcomings, a range of things where we need to improve, including, for example, the educational sector.
Okay. Charles, the same question to you. How would you describe the current European state of the digital infrastructure, of digital economies, and also the policies trying to regulate the sector?
Yeah, so I concur. So the pandemic has shown that it was working. It's actually working. When we look at the numbers, if we take the average of Europe, we are more or less neck to neck with the US, which is often thought to be really much more advanced. What's different with the US is that the European economy in general, but the European digital economy in specific, is much more heterogeneous. So we have countries that are really at the forefront, much more than maybe most of the US states, if you do states to country comparisons between the US and Europe. But we also have countries still in Europe that are really laggards and that are faring way worse than the worst states in the US. So although we are more or less at the same, let's say, level of adoption of most technologies and even very innovative technologies, it's actually hiding some kind of a different situation in terms of difference inside the economic area.
Mm-hmm. But let's start with a provocative point here. I think it was the digital minister from France who said a couple of months back, the United States has the FANGs, so the companies from Facebook to Apple to Google to Netflix. China has Alibaba, and Europe has the DSGVO, the infrastructure regarding data security and the use of data. So do you still see that regarding the economics of it? So the digital economy we still has, in average, in aggregate, some catching up to do?
In terms of big champions, it makes for a nice narrative, right? To have big champions, and people tend to focus on those. But the real economic effect of digitalization, in my view, is actually at the level of the more broader economy. So the way normal, regular companies, which still constitute a big part of the European economic fabric, actually use digital. So of course we can talk about the FANG, and I think we will a little later. But for me, the digital economy topic is actually more of a grassroots kind of topic indeed.
So we might look a bit behind and below the top companies that are in this sector, and rather look at the adoption of technologies, for instance. Now, if we go across the pond, Julia Puertonda, I would also like to look at the question from the more global perspective, namely looking at the role and the political and the economic role that Europe might play in this field of digitalization of artificial intelligence clearly in a digital marketplace on a digitalized globe. Do you see that Europe will play different roles in advancing these fields than, for instance, the United States does with its mega champions that we just talked about?
Yes, thank you very much for this insightful questions and for the invitation to be part of this excellent panel. I learned whenever I'm with the NEOS Lab, I learn so much, and I really learned a lot from the excellent new reports. And as my colleague said before, I do agree definitely on the e-skills versus non-e-skills gap that seems to be especially prevalent within the European Union. So the top four countries within the European Union are way higher than the below bottom 4 countries in the European Union. And when you now compare it to the US, we can say that in Europe, digitalization in Europe has an excellent infrastructure. And what I would also shed light at is artificial intelligence and digitalization. It's also this combination of these two in regards to the overall economic productivity. I do see artificial intelligence as kind of a tool, like a hammer that you can use for positive change, but you can also use it for a negative impact. And here I bring it back to the question that was asked: how is Europe performing on that? And I do believe that within Europe, we do have first a very strong connection of very rich and strong GDP countries. When you think of the Nordic countries, when you think of Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, Schweiz. So excellent infrastructure, excellent connection to highest GDP per capita on earth. So you have this hammer, and then you have the beauty of Europe, that you also have historically grown appreciation for ethics, responsibility. So you have these 3 components that come together, and I make this case only come together in Europe. Excellent GDP per inhabitant, excellent infrastructure, top countries in the world, the Nordic countries, by percentage of internet use within the European Union, but also this beauty of an appreciation of ethics and responsibility. And here I tie it back to the main discussants of today, Dr. Erich Rehm. I really enjoyed when I learned that you have this overarching philosophy view and you imbue it into artificial intelligence. And this is one of the strengths that I don't see in the US. I'm also sometimes on panels in the US, and it's always markets, markets, markets. Does it pay to have regulation? Does it pay to curb cookies? But in Europe, we do think about these things. We do think about the ethics, the dignity in privacy, and the responsibility to protect not only us, but protect the entire world. And here I'm back to the second main discussant, Dr. Hofbräumer, who really thinks in Brussels, and there's something like the Brussels effect. If Europe sets out a regulation by now, it really shapes the entire world. We have this with the internet. We have this with other market regulations. When Brussels comes up with a regulation, this holds for the entire world.
Mm-hmm. But maybe as a quick follow-up, Julie Puertonda, this sounds a bit as a very different approach to, for instance, there is this saying at the Facebook headquarters from the early days of the company, we move fast and break things. And this seems like making sure that the things that are being broken are not important, or are not important to people's lives. Is it a good interpretation of what you just said, that the strength of Europe is kind of making at least sure that the things that are being broken in the process of innovation and the process of dynamism are not important to the fabric of, for instance, the democracy or what people care about in communication, in media, etc.?
Yes, this is so beautiful. You could not have asked a better follow-up question, I have to say. I love this. At Facebook, really, the beginning was break things in order to make them better. And Europe also, and I think this is also one of the strengths that only Europe has. We have highly educated general population bodies, so an excellent education in the overall population. And Europe is very often in the history, and there are so many examples throughout the history of Europe, we were first able to pick up trends very easily because the population is very highly connected, highly interested, going around the globe. Because our countries are so small and constrained, we have to fly out, we have to go into the world to explore. And then people come back and exchange the knowledge that they bring from abroad. So we pick up trends very easily. We have the human capability to then really work on these new trends and make something new and something better. And I don't see a point in Europe competing with the large American companies. Let them break things, let them run against the wall, and we pick up the innovation, and then we do something European. We do something, we imbue a human face onto capitalism, and we implant a human heart into market dynamics, into the fast-paced market dynamics that crush the people, that crush sometimes society in the US when you think about social clashes these days. But in Europe, we pick up these trends and then we do our European version our own way.
Erich, Erich Brem, you already mentioned, I would like to get the question more or less further to you. Will you also say that some of what we consider to be limitations and hurdles in a lot of the discussions are actually kind of part of making the system more resilient, as you mentioned in your first statement before? Or do you still see that there are some challenges and limitations for digitalization in Europe that we might really get kind of get rid of and tackle more closely?
Again, thanks, a $100 million question. Because it's a very complex field. You must remember, whenever you're discussing digitalization and artificial intelligence, that these are areas that are evolving very, very quickly. And some of them are actually relatively old fields. Artificial intelligence has been around for more than 50 years. So you cannot call it a new technology. The fact today is it works quite nicely because we have collected a lot of data in several areas, which was not the case before. It is much easier nowadays to do certain calculations, which was very costly only 10 years ago. And we have new tools and algorithms so that nearly anybody can use them. So that has of course led to a diverse development of artificial intelligence. But as I try to demonstrate also in the paper, it is very likely that this is going to be mainstream very soon. So what is today perhaps a small component in a speech recognition system will spread to diverse applications. It will be used just about anywhere. And this means two things. It means we need to be carefully looking into what the implications of these technologies are, as the Commission has rightly pointed out in so many papers. So there are some things that we need to be concerned about. But on the other hand, we really need to take into account that if these systems are going to be everywhere, then whenever we regulate, we need to be very careful. We need to understand that we are probably regulating all of computer science, and that's saying something. So we need to understand what are the risks. And AI is a risky technology, but it's also a brittle technology in the sense that it has a very specific way of how it's developed. It's developed very, very much experimentally, which means you need to perform experiments. And so there come certain characteristics, and that changes the way we need to deal with these things.
Just to give our viewers and a brief overview, how would you describe and define what artificial intelligence is, and maybe also how it compares to the normal way to do things in a way, or the traditional way to do things? You mentioned one important aspect, one important resource for the process already, that is data. But could you maybe elaborate a bit more about what really defines an AI and an artificial process?
So there are various ways in which you could define artificial intelligence. It ranges from a statistical learning technique where a computer system extracts rules from data examples, to, let's say, a more sophisticated handwritten set of rules that allows a computer program to do things that look intelligent when we look at those things. So there's a big variety within artificial intelligence. By and large, nowadays we say artificial intelligence is a class of computer systems that has a certain degree of autonomy in its actions and in its decisions. Now, this autonomy can be a good thing when we want to, for example, diagnose illnesses, for example, from an X-ray, but it can also be problematic when it's about making decisions about a person's creditworthiness. So this autonomy is in a sense neutral. It depends on how it's used and what its limitations are and what explanations can be given and other things. But an important subclass of AI systems, and these are probably the ones that we mostly talk about, are those that learn from data. And then, of course, the question arises immediately, do we have that data? And then after learning, does the system what it pretends to do, or what we want it to do it? So there is always, with AI, is an important testing phase to see whether the AI system actually does what we want it to do. And that is different from more traditional systems where we usually write down algorithms and we program them and we know beforehand more or less what's going to happen within certain limits. But these two classes are rather different from a computer science perspective, yes.
So in a way, if you talk about it's a bit about the autonomy was the word that you used. So the importance, on the other hand, might be also to not only to write the code and write the rules, but also maybe be aware of some risk management you need to do in order to make this autonomy not break too many things, to stay in the metaphor we used before.
Yes, and also it's a much more experimental development, which is not something that is added on AI development. It's inherent in the nature of an AI system that there is an experimental development. That, of course, means we need to accept a certain risk level because before the system's being tested, we don't really know if it has learned everything that we wanted it to learn, if it has learned it very well, and so on. So there is, as soon as we say there is an AI system, we need to be aware that it needs to be treated slightly differently from more conventional computer software.
Julia Puertonda, you did a study for us 2 years ago about looking very specifically at the healthcare sector. Could you maybe give us also a bit of an insight? We have now heard what AI is very broadly, but how we can already see it in our everyday lives. So healthcare was one of the issues that you looked at for us, but could you maybe elaborate a bit where we already see the use cases for artificial intelligence and artificial processes?
Yes, thank you so much. And I do have to say, I have to give credit at this moment to Dr. Dieter Feierabend, who commissioned and curated the study. And he had the idea for the study. And together with Lauren Mason, they wanted to have a piece on artificial intelligence and healthcare pre-COVID-19, and we focused on Europe, the US, and China. So I do have to give credit that potentially the things that we will be talking today about will become history in 2 years from now, that NEOS Lab is always ahead of its time. So what I find intriguing and fascinating about AI is that there seems to be a connection of artificial intelligence and anti-corruption. When you do a whole data set of the entire world, we find in the corruption index and where artificial intelligence comes from, those are parts of the world where there is simply less corruption. And here I come back to your question, what is artificial intelligence? For me, it's a self-learning entity, and the beauty is it is in places of the world where we think also about ethics that are potentially more responsible. And with this, you have this amazing tool. It's a self-learning entity that hopefully will be able to bring access to goods and services around the world into areas that are potentially more struck by corruption than other places of the earth. And here, back to the healthcare sector, artificial intelligence opens these amazing gates to bring access to affordable medical care, telemedicine into areas of the world where governments are potentially, where the individuals and governments are the richest people on earth, but at the end of the day, there's hardly any money left in the government for access to healthcare. So we do have this amazing tool in artificial intelligence, and I would, the digitalization disruption that we currently see is really something different than the previous industrializations in giving up decision-making qualities, because it's a self-learning entity. We are not making things harder, faster, or better. We are also making things think more and better than human beings, hopefully. But for this, we need the proper regulation in place, and that will hopefully be answered by my co.
And Julia Puertonda, looking at everyday lives of citizens, I mean, there are, of course, a lot of data points out there in healthcare. Could you maybe elaborate on where we already see the benefits of AI, of artificial intelligence in everyday life for a normal European citizen and consumer?
So, I mean, I would right now say it's definitely in healthcare. We do have this phenomenon of COVID tracking. We do have the problem of long haul COVID. About estimated 10 to 30% of people who had COVID-19 have long-term problems, and we already had big data solutions to find what might be wrong with them in a completely novel disease. So we do have these amazing opportunities in healthcare, where artificial intelligence definitely will also come in, is sustainability. One of the nicest examples from New York is a building that has a self-learning algorithm collecting data about the outside, the sunlight, the temperature on a constant basis, and reprogramming itself. So that seems to be a revolution, but we have to potentially look more into the connection of artificial intelligence and sustainability, and here bringing it back to Europe. Currently, Europe is, all eyes are on Europe in the US about the European sustainability taxonomy that comes out of the finance sector, and there's hardly any discussion how artificial intelligence plays into it. Is artificial intelligence sustainable or not? Are the industries that are run by artificial intelligence, are they actually CO2 emitting or not? We really don't know the answer. If you think of cryptocurrency, it's a different answer than if we make a production process slimmer. So I think more eyes on artificial intelligence and sustainability potentially for the future.
So the self-learning of entities and machines might also be self-learning to use less resources to provide better outcomes. Charles Hoffrier, we talked about the size of the AI sector already and how important it is regarding the European economy, and you did a policy brief for us, kind of looking at the numbers, looking at the statistics, how the sector has already evolved and developed. Could you maybe elaborate a bit? We talked now about the places where AI is already being used, where it might already affect people's lives as citizens, as consumers. Could you maybe elaborate a bit on the economic importance of the European AI sector? So are we talking about a growing number of aspects that are employed by many SMEs, small and medium-sized economies? Are there countries that are well ahead? Could you maybe give us just a brief overview about the economic importance of this field?
Yes, so it's a complicated topic because, as Eric mentioned, the issue of, and Julia as well, the issue of taxonomy is actually a big one. So when we talk about AI, people understand different things, and if we take the applications of AI, then there are so many different little applications that people don't perceive are AI, as AI, or may perceive that this is AI. For example, if you take in computer vision, some of the very recent development in computer visions are completely, everybody agrees that this is AI, but there are some old technique of image processing that used to be considered AI, for example, the OCR, so optical character recognition, which is the technology that allow for to recognize the numbers, for example, in a license plate or something like that. Most people today don't see that as AI, it's just run-of-the-mill program.
Okay.
When we ask the company whether they use AI, there was a recent survey by the DG Connect, and more or less in Europe, more or less 40% of the companies says that they use some type of AI.
Okay.
But again, since it's so broad, it doesn't mean much. What seems to be some kind of a trend is the fact that large companies use more AI than small company, and that there are some sectors that use some type of AI much more than others, of course. So the big let's say applications for AI right now in Europe, and this is also really connected with the piece that Professor Prem wrote, is in the factories. So process automation and process optimization using AI techniques, so discrete optimization and these kind of things, those are really already relatively widespread in Europe. There are new techniques that are actually, there are new, let's say, fields where maybe in this case Europe is a little bit of a laggard for different reasons. If you think about the artificial intelligence that needs to deal with languages, well, we are kind of at a little of a disadvantage, because in the US or in China, they have a huge base of population. They all speak the same language, while in Europe, we have smaller base, so we have smaller amount of data for each of the, let's say, fine-tuning of the algorithm. So this might be a little more complicated. So, but AI is growing, that we know. AI is, right now, it's trickling down from big companies to small companies. And yes, it's again, it's heterogeneous, not so much in terms of geographies in this case, but more in terms of sectors. So some sectors use much more AI, and some sectors, such as construction, for example, they use really little. But the real question is, do they need to use it? This is also something, if we consider that everything is going to become AI, maybe this is not so true, but we don't have at this stage a real view of where we want to be, or what we would think AI should take care of, and what will remain, let's say, dealt with traditional production technologies.
Could you maybe give us just one or two examples? You mentioned some of the sectors that might use less of it, like construction, but are there any pockets where Europe or some European markets have already developed a very strong footprint in a way regarding artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence companies?
So some sectors, and it's actually interesting. There are some in terms of IT, the ICT sector is of course a pretty big consumer of AI. So they tend to use AI mostly in this case for anomaly detection and these kind of things. But there are more surprising, let's say, pockets of innovation. For example, we remarked that the manufacture or the process automation is especially strong in some country of Eastern Europe, such as Romania. This might be due to the presence of local player, such as UiPath. Or there are some companies in the field of automation that are making a huge use of AI. You have also the car manufacturer in Germany and Central Europe. So that there are some in manufacturers, there are some places where some types of AI, mostly in terms of process automation or process optimization are pretty strong. Yeah.
Okay. Now, we've discussed more or less where we stand in terms of digitalization, what artificial intelligence is, and I would like to look at our current outlook for a successful transformation of digital aspects of society, of the economy, of maybe the other fields of society like education and culture. Normally, we are very much focusing on this overall single market in Europe, right? So it's very obvious for goods that really travel physically across borders. It might be less visible maybe for the digital transformation in the digital market and the AI sector. So maybe also start here with Erich Brehm. If you look at the European approach to digitalization and transformation, do you see that there are still some hurdles, some things that hold us back in terms of improving the pace or the outcome of digital transformation in Europe? Are there maybe more regulatory or more capacity building hurdles, like for instance to view educational investments that we had in your field in the information systems in the past, so that we have to view programmers and people who develop and use these tools, or the other hurdles you identified in your piece?
Yes. So of course, there are these hurdles, and they are many and on many different levels. Now some of them are inherent in let's say Europe's structure, such as our still not perfectly working digital single market, to say the least. So I think you mentioned the single market, but I think the single market is still not perfect. So even for goods, it's still not perfect. But then there are, let's say, natural constraints, and the one that's always mentioned, and it is especially important in the digital world, is our different languages, our different cultural backgrounds. So there are some challenges which are inherent in Europe. And another question is, one question is certainly, what do we do with those? We cannot discuss them away. So it might be a good idea to make best use of them. And as I argue in my paper, our enormously rich cultural background, our massively also state-financed culture might be one huge potential that Europe has, that maybe some other regions don't have, at least not at this level and not to this extent that we have it. But of course, there are other aspects where we should be careful, and you mentioned regulation. So, and you mentioned GDPR. GDPR is a beautiful example of a let's say a regulation that has had impact worldwide. Yes. And many Europeans are quite proud of having it. Despite the fact that it may not be perfectly working, and it has created a lot of headaches, not just in Europe, but all around the world. But it has instantiated a certain point of view where we say, look, guys, when we are developing digital systems, there are certain boundaries of what one should do and how it should be done. And by and large, even industry and engineers are happy to have this sort of regulation. But it is a difficult point, and artificial intelligence is, of course, is one of the next things to be regulated. And there is, as you know, a draft regulation, which again was received with massive interest worldwide. And we have to see how this will impact on the industry in Europe. We have to be very careful, because what we really need in Europe is a creative approach. We need to be inventive. We need to try out things. We need to experiment with things much more than we do so. And in order to be able to do that, what we need most is people who have the potential to do that, who have the capabilities to do that, who have been trained in IT, who have been trained also, unfortunately, in mathematics by and large, who have the power to try out things because they have maybe a computer at home and a decent network connection, and then relatively few boundaries in maybe even founding a company and bringing things to the market. And I guess here we certainly have certain limitations that in other regions of the world are not as let's say not as constraining as they sometimes are in Europe. And I want to make one particular case because I always find this really problematic, is the well-known fact that in Europe we have a shortage of female engineers in many countries. It is very sad to see how several, especially German-speaking countries, fall short of exploiting the potential of women to become creative in engineering and in information systems and also in AI in particular, because basically we are neglecting half the population and it would be really important to have them on board. So education is one of those big challenges where Europe needs to do more. And I guess this includes, of course, the member states first and foremost, but also at the European level.
And what would be one of your advices or proposals to overcome this topic? So how would you approach this issue that you just identified, that we might have too few people in this field, especially female engineers?
Yeah. So I do not have the magic bullet. This is a very difficult question. It has been subject of research programs, and it's a very difficult question. But one thing that is very clear is we have a very paradox situation, because on the one hand, Europe has an excellent, as has already been mentioned by Julia, an excellent education system. We by and large, Europe's students have a very high level of education. But on the other hand, they have not always the best education in when it comes to digital technologies and being able to program. Programming skills are actually is a massive shortage in Europe. Again, there is big variation throughout European countries. So one concrete thing is really much more best practice exchange between countries, much more encouragement of training also the teachers. I think we have in some countries there's a real shortage of IT trained teachers in our schools. We need to understand that there are only two ways to go. One is to accept technologies developed elsewhere, or to design our future actively and contribute to their design on the basis of skills that young people in Europe acquire, including in schools.
Mm-hmm. But that sounds also like a proposal that we have maybe from time to time look at what is being taught when it comes to the skills and topics in the traditional school system. Julia Puertonda, again, looking at the European market a bit from the more global level, how would you see, from your perspective, how Europe is performing on the topics that Erich Brehm just raised? And do you also see that education might be an important key for the long-term advance the digital markets and the digital artificial intelligence markets in Europe even further?
Yes, I definitely agree with Dr. Brehm on the power of education, and he as a really a professor on this at the university can tell definitely a better story how important it is and how students are working through the material. I think we should also start at a very early level. You can say for programming you need a fluid intelligence which peaks around 20 and then kind of fades. there's also a beauty in a young mind, as was mentioned before. Facebook was actually started when Mark Zuckerberg wanted to make a stance and make new things. You need this kind of Seefahrer-Mentalität in order to embark on new ventures before you are down with paying off a house or a family. But Europe, in particular, I think has this beauty of a whole-rounded education, very many different fields, because you don't pay so much for an education. You're not so under pressure that you have a return on investment, and that really makes Europe this beautiful laboratory of ideas where you can tackle grand changes of the entire globe from a really interdisciplinary perspective. What I also think is you need certain framework conditions, and this here is more a governmental response. So, for instance, the European Union could do something about a fifth freedom of data, really setting market incentives to share data. And here, back to the healthcare sector, Europe has larger data pools on healthcare than any other place in the world, because we have this historically grown large hospitals. When I think of the Charité, but also the AKH in Austria is one of the largest data sources on healthcare information. So if you would have an incentive to share this information and then bundle it with new technologies, for example, big data reaping algorithms or Bluetooth technology, that you know what kind of resources, so point-to-point interconnection of resources. You could have this amazing market of over 500 million people, data historically grown, and in Europe, this free access to healthcare also goes hand in hand with you give up the information and the data to government. So if you would bundle that in Europe, you would have this powerhouse that could inform about medical advancements. The last point I want to make is where you can definitely, as a government, do something, funding, and funding also with future prospects. So rather fund someone who is a bit underdeveloped, who has this prospect ahead of time that this person can develop, than backwards looking, giving prizes once someone gets the Nobel Prize or things like this. Breed a culture of excellence around new ventures and innovation. And on the micro level, the governments themselves, they can think about a taxation of reaping benefits from artificial intelligence, big data. France is rolling out these days a tax of big data and advertisement online. Austria had attempts. When I did the talk in 2019 for NEOS, that was still an issue. I don't know. Please fill me up if you know more what happened to the idea of taxing big data in Austria. And this is the last point I want to leave you with, but potentially the most important in Austria. There's currently this resuscitation of the GmbH Light, called the Austrian Limited. There's this notion from Dorald, Rastiger, Gelter, Konak, and Schuster out. Those are legal scholars. Some of them are in the US and UK, who try to offer the government a faster, more efficient way to have a GmbH Light in order to adapt and be more flexible for innovation in Austria. And the beauty of this idea is also to have incentives for the people who work for the company, without them having to have the burden or cost to vote, to have voting rights. So they can have shares. They are incentivized by, they will get some funding back if the company is successful. So they have these bonus schemes, but they will not be voting themselves. And I think this is a very interesting idea that could really revolutionize Austria and Austria's innovative role within the European compound.
So just to wrap it up here, I don't think that we need to talk too broadly about the Austrian digital tax, because if I remember properly, for this year's budget, which sums up to something like 100 billion euros, the digital tax is something like 65 million euros, so it's 0.5 percentage points of the overall tax revenues. But you mentioned one aspect about improving the founding culture, so founding new companies, growing smaller companies into bigger companies, but also the data aspect. So do you see that, for instance, you mentioned in healthcare that there are riches in a way of data lying around in Europe. You mentioned the Charité or the AKH in Vienna. Do you see that, for instance, initiatives like the Austrian microdata center that some scholars have lobbied hard for in the last couple of years would be one of those steps to improve the access to work with this rich data sets that we have in a way that complies with GDPR and other data standards that we have in Europe? So do you see there is some movement here to engage with and access more data in a more forward-looking way?
Yes, thank you. So as we're down to numbers, you mentioned the 60 to 65 million euros. I have to quote Kristalina Georgieva, the current head of the IMF. I heard a speech before. She was the Secretary General of the IMF. And there she said, the power of self-confidence is more important than the power of money. So it's not only like figures 60, 65 million, is this enough? It's also breeding this culture of self-confidence. It's okay if you make a mistake, if you just learn from it, and if you just move further and you grow on it and you're not giving up. So I think this also ties back to the question where female lose it. If you just get an environment that gives you too much negative input on your way to learn, then you might drop out. And the US is good in patting people's back. It's the best thing if you make a mistake, because you can learn from it deeper than if your self-esteem grows in a success. But on the micro data center, I have to admit, and here I come back to my introduction, I always learn from the NEOS lab. I don't know what it is, to be honest. So please, I will do my homework the next time when we speak to each other. We'll have an informed answer. But what I definitely also want to leave you with, the big data and the richness of big data in healthcare also needs the European protection of vulnerable patients in these situations. And this year again, I think the world would trust data in Europe, because we also think so much about protection of vulnerable groups and dignity in data presentation.
Okay. We might further the debate about the Austrian micro data center further down the road, but it's an initiative to improve the access of scientists and science to the rich data pools that we have, for instance, in the healthcare, in the social security system, in the Statistics Austria, the official statistics bureau in Vienna, to get more access on microdata and thus develop more timely policies, a thing that we of course had to do in the past 18 months during the pandemic. Charles, also for you the question, if you look at the major hurdles in Europe, we heard now about the regulatory side, we heard about language, of course. When you analyzed the markets, what kind of hurdles did you find in terms of what maybe is holding Europe back from becoming a top player in digital transformation?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of what was already said and endemic factors. So indeed, the fact that we are not a single market yet, and we will never be a single market in the sense of a big a big population of people who all have the same culture, same values, etc., etc. So there are some costs to have a pan-European business, and the problem is we don't have any country or sets of country that is big enough so that a company can grow fast enough to then compete with a company that has already reaped the benefits of the network effect from somewhere else. So basically, we were talking about the FANG. Those companies are basically so big because they get more value with each, and they get disproportionately more value with each new person that joins their network. So in Europe, we have the critical mass that we cannot get before we get to the whole Europe. And the problem is, to get to the whole Europe is already extremely costly because you have to adapt to every single market. So more standardization, let's say more harmonization between the countries and the component of the European Union is like it's one of the basic steps to then one day hope to have something like a FANG or a company like that. So that's not good news. But again, we can somehow make it harder to companies to come with a predatory business model from outside, and this is manageable at the level of Europe. So this would imply to again foster education, but not only education in the sense we don't only need really good engineers. We definitely need those, but we don't need only them. We also need a general population that is very aware of all the challenges and all the, let's say, all the new aspects of digitalization. We need people to know that when they join a social network, they are basically leasing their data to people that can then use those data to attract more people, etc., etc. And when people will have integrated that and will have made an informed opinion on what actually is going on today, I guess local solution or local networks or local businesses will become increasingly attractive. So again, education, but not only at the level of university, general population as well.
So in a way, you don't only see the need for more digital savvy engineers, but also more digitally savvy lawyers, managers, the general public, politicians, and all the others who are using or working with modern technologies.
Indeed, even more digitally savvy bakers and butchers. Yes, everybody should be.
The digitally savvy butcher is one thing. The digitally savvy cow might be one step too far. So, could you maybe, even though you are sitting in the Netherlands right now, you of course have the Brussels perspective also when it comes to the tries that have already been there by the European Union and European institutions to promote this digital transformation going forward. So we have already, as we mentioned, with GDPR, for instance, standards when it comes to how to deal with data. Do you see there are still some pressing issues, some open debates that we have to conclude rather quickly in order to get rid of one or two major hurdles down the road? So are there any important political debates that we have to focus on in order to improve the state of affairs in terms of digitalization in Europe?
Yeah, so the legislative side of things seems to be going full steam with new regulations, etc., etc. Enforcement is actually really hard, and we don't necessarily have, or at least what I see is we don't necessarily have ways to enforce the laws that are passed right now on, for example, artificial intelligence, because this is something that is internal to the company, and so you have to rely on whistleblowing and things like that. It's extremely hard. So making good legislation is or regulation is already pretty hard. But at some point, we will need to figure out how to make it, make those legislation, regulation, etc., and their application both fair and efficient. So I think this might be another a whole new topic, but yes,
Okay.
that's something we should keep in mind.
One of the issues that you raised in the paper, Erich Brehm, was very much focusing on developing this this creative European approach, this positive European approach to digital intelligence. And one of the aspects you raised is to overcome the deficiency narrative. Could you maybe elaborate a bit on what this is and how it might help us overcome kind of the hurdles that we see so often in the debate on digitalization?
Yes. So the thing I was trying to point out in the paper is that we may need a more productive, more positive view of things, despite the fact that there are undoubtedly challenges that are of an ethical nature, challenges that have important social impact, and from privacy to questions of sustainability and even autonomy. So that this is undoubted. But as always in life, the glass can be either half empty or half full. And I believe when it comes to AI, we certainly need a stance where we look at things with a more positive view than what is currently often debated. Because very often at a European level and also at a member state level, the discussion starts with a whole range of concerns. What's bad about AI, what it could do, what rights might be infringed, and what the shortcomings would be. And while all of that are valid points, and we need to certainly address them, it is a difference whether to approach things with this deficit perspective, or to say, well, let's have a more creative view of AI, see what do we have, where are we good at, and how can we build on those strengths, and try out things. And I think we need more of that. Julia mentioned the healthcare sector as one example, and it's a tricky example because obviously healthcare is so. First of all, it's an area where Europe is quite good. I mean, we have some of the best health systems in the world. They're not cheap, quite expensive, but they are really good. And we can certainly do a lot with the data that is available, as was mentioned by Julia, in big hospitals, or even at national level in many European states. On the other hand, there are huge challenges. This is not easy. There are privacy concerns. There are really bad things you can do with just your with skincare data, or it's very simple, innocent looking data. You can do terrible things. However, and this is really an important point I want to make, computer science is not at the level where it was 10 or 20 years ago. We have come up with pretty clever tools and techniques to even learn from the data while maintaining people's privacy. We know how to build databases securely. We know how to track people's interactions in databases when they are trying to do bad things with them. So the state of the technology has shifted, and we shouldn't treat data as if it was inherently evil. That is not the case. We really have new technologies, from new cryptographic tools to even using AI for data protection. So we should use them, and we should make it easier for researchers to use those tools, including across member state borders, which is a huge challenge. I mean, nowadays, try to set up a project where hospitals from different countries exchange their data. That is terribly difficult, also legally, and rightly so. I mean, it's sensitive data. But there are tools and methods, and we should foster those tools. We should make them much more widely used, much more widely known. People need to understand that this can be done, including politicians, because of course the deficit narrative that we very often have in Europe arises from fears which are in principle justified, but as I said, technology is moving on, and we can be much better. Let me add one more thing. The deficit perspective is not just at these individual rights. We also have a European deficit perspective, which is always this discussion about Google and Facebook, and they are much larger and they have all the data. And I think that's of course, yes, that's probably uncontested. But on the other hand, Europe is also good in areas. We have really strongholds in industry, in machining, in the automotive industry. We have very strong embedded systems, people working on machine data, which also has the added advantage that it's very often not personal data. Yeah. So we should foster those things rather than complaining all the time about the things we don't have.
And so could you maybe elaborate then a bit more on where you would also see some of this creative approach that you laid out to be used going forward? Healthcare was one of the issues that, of course, we raised now a couple of times. Could you maybe elaborate a bit more on other parts of the economy where you would really see that there is a positive push forward possible?
So there are, of course, many, but let me just use three. One is the one I already mentioned, is industry in the, let's say, the more hardcore machining industry, the automotive industry, perhaps even including some sectors such as energy, where Europe is still a stronghold of wind energy production, for example. Okay. So we have areas of competence that are not just important in Europe, but they're also hopefully important worldwide for the future when you think of sustainability. And one important question in all those areas I mentioned, in all those hardcore machining areas, is how to control the machines. And controlling such machines is not an easy task. And very often nowadays, people use artificial intelligence. They use statistical learning to optimize the control of these machines. This is in most cases, as I said, non-personal data. Is relatively important because you can really save a lot of energy. You can control these machines much better. So this is a huge area. And here, already now, we lack engineers. We lack AI engineers who can help develop new software, including AI, to help improve those machines. And we see this because when you talk to companies, they will tell you they have many ideas, but they cannot realize those ideas because they lack the people for running the projects. So but there are others. Yes.
In a way, I would summarize your point also at being using AI to be more efficient when it comes to industrial processes and machining. The prime example now, again from Austria, unfortunately, but in Carinthia there was this big investment by Infineon in a chip production firm, which I think has only 20 new staff employed to work on a €2 billion project, and this relationship is clearly something that is unique for such a big capital investment.
Yes, and so of course this Infineon very much is focused on power electronics, which is also a topic that is really has become very important. It also shows a strength of the European semiconductor industry, because it's always also mentioned that Europe lost the semiconductor industry. It's not quite true. It's still quite good in power semiconductors. Not an easy competence to uphold, but we are still there. But there are other sectors, and the other two I mentioned in the paper is education, because education is I mean, what many people, as a consequence of the pandemic, had to do was to resort to electronic tools, to online databases, to from YouTube videos, which of course is a US company, to other software systems that actually help students identify the errors they make. They can design examples so as to make them understand whatever the topic is much better. So there is actually nowadays, there's AI software being written to support students that have specific requirements, that have specific needs, that can spend much more time than any teacher can on explaining things and finding out what are the challenges that students have. And then this in any area, from teaching mathematics to acquiring a musical skill. But again, as Charles already said, I mean, it is unlikely that there will be this one big software company addressing all needs of all European citizens and students. And it's just not going to happen. There may be one that is probably tuned for the Austrian market, and then probably one that is more tuned to what French students need and how teaching and learning works there. So I think here we have to be diverse and creative. And the third one, which is not unrelated to this example, is our cultural history, being from, ranging from new ways of presenting our cultural heritage, maintaining it. There are huge databases, and there's a huge resources simply in this area, to modern ways of producing arts, music, culture. There is no reason to leave the modern markets of the film industry entirely to a handful of US companies. Actually, given that still the taste of many Europeans is not perfectly tuned, although Hollywood has been trying, we still occasionally want to see a European film, and there's a good reason for it. And this is because we live in this culture, and that will keep with us, that will stay with us for some time, and we need to build on those things and include even modern technologies. If you look at the success of some of the electronic arts festivals, it's evident that there is a market also in this area.
Given that we already are running a bit out of time, I would like to wrap up the discussion here on overcoming the deficiency narrative. Charles, you've already been referred to, and I would like to get your also data-driven view here. When you look at the fields and economic sectors, and some of those that Erich just talked about, do you identify some areas where Europe can really kind of be in the lead of the digital transformation? Are there some pockets of industry or economic sectors where you really see that there is a USP, a manager might call it, where Europe might advance to maybe have not a FANG, but still be in the lead of a digital transformation?
Yeah, so I think that we already talked about it, but again, we are really leaders in manufacturing and manufacturer software like ERPs. We have the FANG of the industry, which is SAP. Yes. So we already have like super big companies, and that would be the normal, or let's say the natural place where those big companies would let's say start, because we have companies that have a lot of capital, that already have a user base. So this is pretty much where we should look in the short run. In the longer term, well, this is kind of a more complicated topic, but indeed, some kind of companies in the education would be something with even more with the push now at the European level for this kind of initiative to arise. We also have maybe in terms of recreation, this kind of thing. The thing is, social networks, that ship has sailed. So I don't think we will manage to get something that we consider now as a FANG, or those big industrial or consumer goods company. This is too late for us. So indeed, manufacturing is pretty much down the alley, and then let's try to get indeed healthcare, education, and maybe tourism as well. So yes.
And do you also see that the last 18 months, with all their challenges, has also created some more opportunities here? Because clearly, for instance, education has been a sector that has been rattled by the last 20 months in terms of how, for instance, social distancing had made it necessary to overcome the hurdle of physical boundaries and, for instance, create more online courses, create more digital learning experiences, e-learnings. So do you see that education might also be a sector coming out of this pandemic that might be a significant driver of some of the more positive, innovative approaches?
Yeah, so okay, I know the situation here in Belgium, let's say Western Europe in general, maybe Central Europe. I've been kind of hopeful at the hopeful in the circumstances at the start of the lockdowns, etc., that it would give a high boost at this question of remote interaction and these kind of things, remote teaching. Unfortunately, it seems that people seems to want to come back to more in-person interaction. The problem is this would have been something that would have been a boon for the European economy, because once again, we are still not so mobile from one country to the other in the EU, and those technologies would have somehow overcome a little this barrier. So I think if we still have a small window of opportunity where we can try to get things around, but right now I would say not so much.
Okay. Well, we still have maybe to do one or two more studies regarding this topic going forward. I mean, there are some best-in-class approaches, of course, in this regard. You can look at Finland, Sweden, Denmark, when it comes to their educational systems and how this has also increased the resilience of the education system in the past 20 months. So if we wrap up our discussion here, I would like to briefly turn to you with a brief question, and I would ask you also for a brief answer when it comes to your view about at the future of where Europe might stand going forward when it comes to digital companies and digital industry. So we've talked a lot about what our necessary reforms might be, what our strengths are, and I would get a brief impression from you as experts in your field, also for our viewers and for us at the NEOS Lab, where you really see Europe grow in the future when it comes to digitalization and artificial intelligence. Which areas of things that might sound, like Zukunftsmusik, the music about the future. There is no better word for it from a German word. Which Zukunftsmusik might be realistically employed in European business, in European society, and in European politics going forward. And I would like to start with you, Erich. After conducting this study for us and write this paper, how do you see the digital future for Europe?
So, in short, it's going to be everywhere. I mean, that is the truth. That we have barely scratched the surface of what digitalization can do. And even if we see some trends and developments that we don't like, that is all the more that should stimulate us all the more to work on these areas and to overcome the challenges in those fields. So if I had to give a general answer, it would be, I hope Europe would develop a particularly strong view on, let's say, on ethical ways of using digital technologies. I think Europe should become a stronghold of developing value-sensitive approaches to developing technologies, and to build on its history of enlightenment and continue to do that. And it will start from its culture. It will start from its strong structures that it already has built in education, and exploit it in areas where it is still quite good internationally, such as in certain areas of the industry, but hopefully also in ways to entertain people, to enlighten us, and to make us wiser, such as in culture.
That's a great approach to things. Jule Puertonda, also the question for you: where do you see Europe regarding its digital future going forward?
Yes, so we can say from the history of Europe, the last time when a major plague hit Europe, the Renaissance actually grew out of it. So I believe we're embarking on a Renaissance, and when we ask what we will build that will be still enjoyed by the rest of the world in 500 years, I think in the digital domain, we will see more advancement in healthcare, in preventive care. Also in the US, there's currently this trend breaking of long haulers finding themselves in social media. They don't want to go to the hospital. It's too expensive in the US. And they discuss their symptoms and remedies. And it's amazing and mind-blowing that the US is the country of the world where 70% of all pharmaceuticals of the world are consumed. And when you go into these long haul forums, you see that the people are actually, they want to have solutions that are not pharmaceuticals. They want to have sustainable solutions. I do think we will also see education revolutions. We will see online consortia, and we should seize the chance of Europe, so many different languages. I would have loved in my high school to learn languages from people who really speak them. And had my Austrian professors trying to teach me. So we could do this with Zoom. We could assign people the most prominent class at MIT is a class where people have freedom. They just get the time and money to do and meet with interesting people. And we could have seized the chance during the lockdowns that people get the time off. They don't have to commute, but they can meet online. And when we build the future domes in luxury events online, we also have to think about sustainability. At NYU, sustainability by now online means also less information, less emails, not clogging people with misinformation. Switching off emails during a few days is an idea that comes from Germany. And we also have to think about the cancel culture, what we've created online, that you can buy click farms, people who target competitors, raise negative information in really building an online wall and crowd, and then blowing up negative information in search engine black hat strategies. We do have to think about this, and I think this is the next falling wall in internet regulations, that we really do think how search algorithms can be used against competitors, and this is happening, unfortunately. And I do think that Europe can again one more time, like Victor Meyer-Schönberger, Maximilian Schrems, or Bonelli, who really were Austrians who had this idea to make a world that is better for everyone online and take a stance on search engine misinformation.
Thank you so much. Also, the same question to you, Charles. So, looking ahead, where do you see Europe's digital future?
Eric said, I think the digital is going to be everywhere. I just hope that it's not going to substitute what we don't need, so that we're going to still enjoy like living in the real world. And I also see that in Europe we have the opportunity to make that happen. Again, I would like, it might be wishful thinking, so it's not forecast wish. I would love to see that people go into this new knowing that what we are getting into, what we are, I think it should be education and make that everybody is aware of what we are doing.
Unfortunately, I was here at least at the end of the line, not hearing everything properly. But I heard you reiterate one of the sentences that Erich already mentioned, namely that digital will be everywhere, and we just hope that it might not be everything, right? So we might have the chance to use our digital tools, but might not be driven to just clogging into our phones and having nothing else in terms of our consumer demand, for instance. So first of all, I would love to give you all a round of applause and for your time and for your insights in, and promoting and also discussing our recent paper, Creative European Approach to Digital Intelligence. Thanks again for your time to Graz, to the Netherlands, and to Florida in the United States. Thank you so much for being with us here today in Vienna. And also thank you all at our team here and at ELF who made it possible that we have this new creative approach to AI, to digital intelligence, and to have a paper that will hopefully, as Julia said, guide the debates for years to come, as we did prior to the pandemic when we talked about healthcare. Erich Brehm, so many thanks to you and for your insights to look with us at digitalization and AI in Europe. And please have it from me, but imagine the digital applause for you and your time and your insights for the session today. Thank you so much. And now, to all the viewers who joined us and who will rewatch this, digitalization is clearly one of the major topics that we focus on when we talk about the modern Austria, das moderne Österreich. At the NEOS Lab, as a think tank, we have 4 areas of expertise that we'll look at, the one being the economy, the other being education, the Rechtsstaat, democracy, everything that has to do with the rule of law, and of course modernity, everything that looks at modern approaches to things, from media to mental health to digitalization. Come visit us at lab.neos.eu. We have a couple of publications coming up regarding a more Austrian-focused area of expertise, of course, budget, tax reform, and things like that. But we will also delve more closely into digitalization and AI going forward. So join us there at lab.neos.eu. Vielen Dank nochmal in die Runde.